Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Andrew Yates, and I'm the CEO of KPMG in Australia. And KPMG is very pleased to present the 2050 track of South by Southwest Sydney. And it's my real pleasure today to introduce Professor Brian David Johnson. Brian has made the future his business. From 2009 to 2016, he was Intel Corporation's first ever futurist. Currently, he's a professor at Arizona State University's Global Futures Laboratory and a School for the Future of Innovation in Society. He also works in a private practice with a broad range of groups, including governments, militaries, corporations, non-profits and startups, to help them envision their future. Brian holds over 40 patents and is a best-selling author of both science fiction and fact books. A threat-casting textbook, The Future You, War, Wizards and Robots, and 21st Century Robot. Every day it feels like there's a new article telling us that AI is going to transform our lives. And often that transformation is presented in a negative light. At KPMG, we recently asked some of our younger people how they felt about the future. The overwhelming response was excited but uncertain. And that uncertainty was driven by the role technology will play in their future. In his session today, How to Think Like a Futurist, From AI to Safety, Brian will show us how we can prepare for a future with AI, what should we be worried about, and what can we look forward to, how we can think like a futurist. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Brian David Johnson.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we still have people coming in, so come on in. There's plenty of room. So that's what we're going to do this afternoon, is we're going to basically turn you all into futurists. So you've entered this room for whatever you do, whoever you are, wherever you came, but you are all going to leave as futurists. Our numbers will be legion. We will take over South by Southwest Sydney. This is our show now. So that's what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off telling you a little bit about myself. What the heck is a futurist? Like, what is that? Andrew did a great job coming in the overview, but I'll tell you a little bit more about kind of what I do and how I do it and what that looks like. And then we're actually going to get into, like, okay, how do you think like a futurist? All kidding aside, I am a professor at Arizona State University back in the US. And I teach this. I have taught this for over 20 years, sort of I make futurists, much like what we're going to do today. But I want to kind of give you this idea of saying, well, how can you think like a futurist? There's no better place to actually be and think like a futurist and have these conversations than at South by Southwest Sydney. Because looking at the agenda, and actually myself today, I was kind of tottering around, kind of putting and listening to what people were saying and some amazing talks and podcasts. It's a really great place to actually get into that futures mindset. And it's a little bit different maybe than the way you look at that. And then we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence, because nobody's talking about that. Thank you. Thank you for laughing at that. Man, I've been working in AI for 20 years, and we're going to talk about that. But whew, man, people talk about AI. So we're going to get to that and get really, really into it, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. And then also after this, so you know, I'm also going to then head straight to the bookstore and actually be a book signing, and I'll be hanging out there for a while before we're going to the after parties and things like that. All right, so let's get into who the heck am I? So I'm Brian David Johnson. They call me BDJ. And I'm a futurist. So what that means is that I work with organizations to look 10 to 15 years out into the future. I model both positive and negative futures. And then I turn around and look backwards and say, OK, what do you need to do today, tomorrow, 5 years from now to move towards that positive future and away from the negative future? So that's the work that I do. As Andrew mentioned, I was the first futurist at the Intel Corporation, where we kind of got together because it takes them 10 years to design, develop, and deploy a chip. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because it's important to the story of AI. But so it was my job. I'm a systems architect, so I'm an engineer and a designer by training, to sort of say, OK, how can we think about today and then look 10 years out and figure out what people want to do with technology 10 years in the future, because we had to start building it and going through and doing it. And that's really the work that I did. And to date myself, that I was brought in the early 2000s to do smart TV. So I was one of these crazy people who was out there saying we were going to use the internet to watch television. Somebody went, huh, you know it happened, right? Like everybody remembers that, right? So, and this is one of the things, so I can tell you, so one of my only, kind of really my only goal in life is to impress my wife, to be quite honest. And so it was during the depths of the pandemic, right? We're deep, everybody's locked in, nobody's getting off their couch, and we're sitting there and we're watching one of the streaming services like Netflix, and we're watching it and we're going and we're watching different things, and my wife turns to me and goes, "Thank you." I was like, yes, I'm in. That was it. Like, I'm done. That was a mic drop. It was like, okay, great, thanks. So no, I was brought in to do that, and so we kind of architected that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And so I work with these organizations as an applied futurist to kind of go through and think about, okay, how do we plan and prepare and get ready for the future? How do we dispel fear? And you'll see I've done some pretty dark stuff. And a lot of the work that I do in my threat casting lab has been pretty dark. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about that as it relates to AI. But the whole goal is to kind of enable people to take action today. Right? We don't predict the future. That's not what we do. There's no predictions here. I always tell people, if somebody like shows up at your doorstep and makes a prediction, like you meet somebody who goes, "This is what your future is going to be," slam the door in their face. Like you don't, like how do you know my future? Like what? No. The future is far too complicated. Who you are and where you are matters. And so if anybody sort of comes and starts talking about the future and tells you this is exactly what it's going to be, they're wrong. You can say there's this weird bald-headed beard futurist who told me you're wrong. He's BDJ, look him up. Okay, so that's kind of what I do, and we're going to get into the details of that. But I always like to start my talks with this, to tell people that I am an optimist. Now, optimism and pessimism are not naturally occurring events. They are a decision. It's a decision that we make, and I make a decision to be an optimist. And why? Why do I do that? Well, I've been a futurist now for about 30 years, and I do 10 years out. So that means I have seen it actually happen, right? I've seen a lot of the work that I do. I've seen all that. It's actually happened. Reference my couch during the pandemic. Like it happened. And so it's really humbling to see, hey, wait a minute, we do build our future. Human beings get together and build the future. And to me, that gets me really excited. And that's what makes me an optimist, because let's get together and build a future that's awesome. Let's not get together and build a future that sucks. It's pretty simple. So we need to have that agency to know that we actually get together and build our futures together. And that's what makes me an optimist. Now, I can tell you from my time doing this that if I wanted you to like me, I would be a pessimist. I've lived this. So people love pessimistic futurists. Right? Just go online, go to the bookstore, go anywhere, right? And I lived it in Sweden. So I was on stage in Sweden. There was me, the optimist guy who's like, oh, the future's going to be great. We're going to get together and build the future. And then there was this other bald Swedish guy who basically said, everything will end on Tuesday. And during the Q&A, guess who everybody went and talked to? Not to the, hey, I'm an optimist guy. Everybody went to the, we're all going to die on Tuesday guy. And it's a trap, right? To me, I think that is not only a trap because it appeals to our fear, and we're worried because we're worried about ourselves and our families and our communities and our kids, and it's insidious. And I think it's terrible because I think it's irresponsible. Because I have no problem, and you'll see, I do a lot of threat casting work and a lot of very dark work. I have no problem saying there's things to worry about, and we'll talk about that when it comes to AI. But you don't come into like a party and say, we're all going to die. That's a jerk move. You will not be invited back. You will not be invited back. But part of being an optimist is to say, yeah, we've got some problems coming in the future, and here's what we should do about it. And to me, that's the difference. So I am a declared optimist, and you will see that as we kind of go through. All right, so let's think about how do we think like a futurist? So here is where you begin your transformation. How do you think like a futurist? So as I mentioned before, I do work today looking 10 years out. For right now, for the rest of this talk, the flowers are the future. So that's the future. And so I sit here, and how most people think the future works is here we are today, and then we go, and you've got the future happens. And it doesn't really work like that, right? Because it's my job to actually start here today and look out at all the technologies, all the economics, the culture, the geopolitics, and to think about not just the next big thing, but to think about the thing after the thing. So what comes after all the things that we're hearing about? It's a little thought exercise I do with my students, and I'm going to do with you, which is called Übermorgen. How many of you speak German? Okay, the person close to me, oh no, you're not going to have to do it, but she now knows when I say Übermorgen that I have a perfect German accent. Perfect, pitch perfect. She's like, oh my gosh, he's German. No, I don't. So Übermorgen means overmorrow, which is kind of scary, actually. Really, it means the day after tomorrow. It's the thing after the thing. So what is the Übermorgen? So in my classes and when I work with people and when I work with governments and military and corporations, we talk about the Übermorgen. It becomes a thing. I encourage you, as you leave this room and you are now futurists, to actually go and talk about the Übermorgen. And it actually becomes really functional. Because as you're standing here today and you're thinking about what's coming next, and the halls of this conference center are filled with what's coming next. People are talking about what's the next big thing, what's the next big trend, what's coming, and all of that is incredibly important. But as you think like a futurist, you need to think about, okay, what comes after that? What is the thing after the thing? And you can functionally do it as you talk to each other and you talk to somebody where somebody says to you, hey, I've got this new technology, I've got this new thing, this is going on, and then you can say to them, what's the Übermorgen? And they will look at you like you're crazy. Then what you want to say to them, well, what comes after that? What happens when that succeeds? What happens when that product or that technology fails? What is the thing that comes after? Because what that allows you to do is not only look at what's coming, but to find out what comes after that. And by the way, it's not a single thing, right? It's a range of possible and potential futures. We're not trying to predict the future here. We're trying to come up with a range of what it could look like. Right? And so you actually kind of think about it. It's kind of like a cone as you're going through it. You're like, okay, well, what are all the things that could happen? And then here's where it gets really, really good, especially if you're in business, but for your personal lives as well. So as we're hanging out here in the future, and you're on the other side of the next big thing, and you've thought about all the things that could happen, both positive and negative. Again, there's no right. There's no prediction. So what are all the things? Because then you get to decide. You start asking yourself, well, what is the future I want? And what is the future I want to avoid? Again, this is going to become very important as we talk about AI. So what is the future I want and the future I want to avoid? And you start thinking about that and articulating it. What does that future look like? One way that I termed it in one of the books I wrote was called The Future You. What do you want the future you to look like? And I want people to get really, really detailed, right? I'm a word nerd, right? I'm a sci-fi geek, I'm a tech geek, but I'm also a word nerd, and words matter. So part of the skill of thinking like a futurist is being able to tell yourself, okay, give me the details. Like, what does a Tuesday look like in your future? What do you want it to look like? What do you not want it to look like? This becomes really important, especially with technologies and all those things that are coming, because you really want to get to the details, because the details are going to help you shape your future and help you build the future and have conversations with people about the future. And that's why this Übermorgen is so important, because it's not just you thinking that way, but it's you having conversations with your friends and your colleagues here at South by Southwest, with complete strangers, to say, okay, well, let's talk about it. Here's your next big thing. Let's talk about what comes after that. And then let's think about what we want and what we want to avoid and all those range of futures. Because once you've done that and you've defined it and you've talked about it and you've gotten into it, now you turn around and look backwards and say, okay, well, what do we need to do along the way? What are the steps we need to take? And that is what disruption is. That is where innovation comes from. That is where all these different things kind of come from. And that's what becomes really, really important in this, because it allows you to make decisions when you stand here in the present and you look at the next big thing. You can make different purchase decisions. You can make different investment decisions, education decisions. You have basically a much more full and robust target that lives on the other side of the next big thing. And certainly, AI is the next big thing that a lot of people are talking about. So that's how you think like a futurist. Just ask yourself, here's this thing that is presented to me. What comes after that? What's positive or negative? What do I want from that? And to get really detailed, and then you can turn around and look backwards and really think about how it applies to you and your life. All right, so now let's talk about AI. Okay, we're going to get into it. So I figure what we should do, because as I mentioned to you, I've been doing work in AI for some time. So AI is not the next big thing. It's actually been around for a very, very long time, right? AI was, had its kind of heyday in the kind of 50s and 60s, and as it was growing in the 70s. And, AI started its life in science fiction, which is cool. Because I'm a science fiction author, so having it in science fiction is really great, and science fiction is a really good tool, but it's also kind of plagued it. As it's moved through our lives, the way that the representations that we've been shown are those sci-fi representations. And if any of you have ever seen or read a sci-fi story, a sci-fi movie, if you're in the future and everything goes really great, and the main character, nothing happens to them, and it's all really rosy, that's a great future, but it's a terrible story. Like, it's terrible. And I try to explain to people, they're like, oh, you're a sci-fi author and a futurist. I said, yeah, but you've got to understand, why is somebody doing this? Somebody is writing a sci-fi story or coming up with a movie because they want to sell tickets or books. And so they got to, blow a lot of stuff up and make it be really, really bad because that's interesting. Now, again, as a futurist, that's not interesting at all, just so you know. I'm not that type of futurist, right? So how do we make sure that we make it sort of a better future? And so that's where, with AI, it kind of inherently has its flaws. And so as you start to think about AI and your future with AI, and that's one of the things to remember, that it was born in science fiction. It was born in salaciousness. It was born in world-ending stories. It was born in death and destruction. But we don't want that. The other thing about AI is it is the worst name ever. Worst name ever. Artificial intelligence. It's basically like artificial, it's bad. Artificial flowers, not so good. If somebody's artificial, you don't want to be around them. They're artificial. It's bad. You have intelligence. Intelligence is good. This person is intelligent. These things is very intelligent. That film was intelligent. So you have artificial intelligence. Why did anybody give us this? Because the thing is it's such a contradiction. It's good, bad, hot, cold. You're like, what is it? Which is it? And so in that way, also inherently, when it was named, it was very flawed. And we'll get into a little bit more kind of deeper about that. But what I wanted to tell you a little bit more about is sort of how we kind of got to where we are today, and then as we move out into the future. So as I mentioned to you before, I am a systems architect. I am a huge nerd. This is how big of a nerd I am. I have a whole bunch of really cool people who came out to talk, and I show you a systems architecture diagram of the CE3100, the first chip I helped to design. Yeah, right. Ain't she pretty? Yes, thank you very much. By the way, so that was the CE3100, and we were engineers, and so we came up with great names. You know what the next one was called? The CE4100. That's right, you got it. Hot stuff, hot stuff. So this is what we did, and so, did you see that? Watch. The people who are shifting back and forth, like I'm talking to you, and you can see me, and then I go back, and we're talking, and then we go back. That's power, man. Okay, so we designed these sort of very early on, kind of thinking about these systems architectures and really getting into it. And as Andrew mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of sort of technical stuff I'm not going to bore you with. But the idea being that we can use this process to think about it, and it literally turns into system diagrams and things like that. And you can actually instrument it and kind of go there. So, back in the late 90s, early aughts, we went through and built those things to have these platforms. So here's what came next. So in the early 2010s, one of the things that I did at the Intel Corporation, so I did smart TV, we did work in the Internet of Things, we did work in self-driving cars, sort of a lot of the stuff that is kind of rolled out. Well, one of the things that we did work on was robots. Now, when I was talking to the chief technology officer at Intel and they said, hey, we want you to design the future of robots, I had an out-of-body experience because I just imagined the little 10-year-old me, and I went up and whispered in my ear, dude, you're going to build robots when you get older. It was like, what? And then I would look up and see the 35-year-old me and I'd be like, where did your hair go? It just went south, basically. So that's what we started doing. We started thinking about social robots and building social robots. And we actually used science fiction to do it. And we did this work called 21st Century Robot, which was actually written with kids in mind, so being able to go and write it. And we worked in artificial intelligence. And so this was many years ago, right? And so it was an open architecture platform. We used apps and things like that. So one of the things that I was up in front of the media, and they would always ask, I would bring my robot. My robot's name was Jimmy. He's really cute. So we actually built Jimmy. So we started doing it in science fiction, much like AI, started doing it in science fiction, then we built Jimmy, and Jimmy came out, and he was walking around, and we took him on a media tour. And the way that you architected him, he had artificial intelligence in it. The way you architected him was apps, and you downloaded different things. And I was literally talking to a news broadcaster, and they said, BDJ, are you worried that this cute little robot is going to rise up and take over humanity? And this is where your media training comes in, where you're like, did you see my cute robot? He's like this big. And I was like, this robot is not going to take over your life. Trust me. He's cute. And I said, well, actually, as an architect, what I would tell you, it's all apps, is how you program them. It's pretty simple. If you don't want this robot to take over the world, do not download the World Domination app. It's pretty easy. Now, all joking aside, keep that in mind, though, because as we start thinking about the future of AI, we need to really start thinking about that World Domination app. And as we talk, hopefully nobody's coming to you and going, do you want the World Domination app? But some people are talking about that, and we'll get to that. So one of the things, though, that I loved doing is building robots with kids. It was amazing. Building robots with kids, using the artificial intelligence, getting them to build all these different ones. And I now will never build robots with adults ever again. Now, I have learned in doing all that work and all that research, I have learned what it takes to make a robot appear and be intelligent and be accepted by all humanity. There's only one thing that it needs to do. Who would like to know what that is? Nobody? I can just go. You want me to go? No, so I can tell you the one thing that will make robots and AI acceptable to humanity. Would you like to know what that is? Yes. Sure. Did you hear that? Oh, I love you, man. Sure. Yeah, okay, fine, whatever. You can tell me that. Okay. No, wait, are you sure? See, here's the thing. You can't unlearn what I'm about to tell you. So I'm already going to turn you into a futurist. But when you walk out of here today, literally you will be a different person. This knowledge, you cannot unknow. You will basically mark your life with this, and then when I left that auditorium, now that. So with that in mind, who wants to know the secret? Yes or no? Give it to me. Now we're getting there. Now we're getting there. Okay. Wait a minute. So here's the thing. So you will walk out of here and you will go home and tell your children about this. But maybe you don't have to. You might actually go home and have children just so you can tell them. Which means we might really affect the population of this great country by what's going to happen in this room. Okay, I'm going to tell you. The one thing that a smart artificial intelligence-driven robot must do to be accepted by all humanity is fart. It's true. No, it's true. Imagine that little guy. Imagine that little guy walking, stops, does this, laughs, says, excuse me, and keeps going. I defy you to show a room of 10-year-olds that and not have them fall in love with it. And honestly, a whole bunch of university researchers, uni researchers, same thing. It just slays them all. It is very fun. But that idea, though, why? because it shows it's funny, but it's random. Like I could draw you the system architecture for what that looks like. It's very random in how it happens. It sort of shows intelligence. It's not, but it appears that way. And it appears somewhat human, right? Because human beings fart, robots don't fart. Everybody knows that, right? So human beings do that, and robots don't. And so it's this way of sort of bridging that gap. And so as we think about intelligence and we think about that, it's really closely tied to humanity. So the next thing, as we move forward, so one of the things that I'll be talking a little bit more about is in the artificial intelligence world, as Andrew mentioned, I do threat casting, which is as it sounds. It's thinking about very dark futures. I do a lot of work with militaries. I do a lot of work with NATO, kind of thinking about what that might look like and what people might do. And so this report is from 2016, thinking about the weaponization of artificial intelligence and what that means. And there's a lot of things that we really should be worried about. There's things that we need to kind of get into and sort of take that next step to kind of stop it and prevent it. And a lot of people are beginning to talk about it. And then also as a part of that, we started turning them into graphic novels and getting people to really think about and really visually look at the kind of really scary things that could go on with artificial intelligence and where things might go and what it might be like. And it gets really dark, and then it gets really darker, and stuff goes really bad. And I can tell you, you know when you've hit the right point where you're getting people's attention to say, this is what we really do need to be worried about, is when you can take a colonel in the United States Army, and they're like, whoa, that's too much. That's too much. Johnson, BDJ, you got to slow it down. And that idea of being able to show something that is so visceral to people that they do understand that there's a lot of things that we need to do as we move forward. So, and then there's the final thing, which we talk a little bit about, and this is where the book signing is. To make it a little bit lighter, this is my most recent book, which is What You Need to Know About AI. So it was actually it's written for 8 to 13-year-olds. Or as the publisher likes to say, the rest of us as well. So it's kind of being able to say, okay, so what is this? And the reason why I love doing this kind of gets back to what we're going to talk about now. Let's really get into and really talk about AI. So when you explain AI to an 8-year-old or to anybody, it's incredibly important, step number one, as you begin as futurists, to sort of know what AI is, right? Aside from it being a dumb name, AI is just software. It's just software. So thinking about it, it is just software that is programmed and made by human beings that is trained on data. That's it. And taking that first, I think, is really important. And especially when you have somebody coming and giving you these big, dark futures. Remember the Swedish guy who's like, everything's going to end on Tuesday. When you have all these really dark futures, just take a step back. Again, thinking about the thing after the thing and saying, it's just software. Software programmed by humans, which is going to be incredibly important as we move forward, but it's just software. The other thing to remember is that it's not human. And when I say that, you are like, yeah, I know, BDJ, I know it's not human. But here's the thing, it leaks into our language. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to write that book for kids, is because I was on the internet and was going around and thinking, okay, I want to write this book. And I got really angry because there was a how do you teach artificial intelligence to children? And it says, what is that? What is artificial intelligence? It is machines that think and learn. No, it doesn't. No. And what really bothered me is because you have an 8-year-old there who says, well, I think and I learn, so it just must be like me, and it must be human. And then all of a sudden, it starts to conflate. And it actually, as we start talking about it, even throughout things like machine learning and all these different areas when it comes to that, and even artificial intelligence, right, that it leaks into it, and we start to imbue it with the humanity. And we start to imbue it with more intelligence, with more power than it actually has. So the idea, we need to kind of police ourselves and our brains and our thinking and going, no, it's just software. No, it's not going and taking on a life of its own. No, it's actually been trained by people. So kind of understanding that as we think about this future, it's just software that's trained by people, and it's not human. And that's what becomes so important as we sort of think through AI, because getting back to the present, is here we are today, and we're thinking about the Übermorgen of AI. AI will be riven through everything as we think 10 to 15 years out. It will be a part of our lives to the point where every piece of software will be AI. To the point where, as we're going and thinking about this future and thinking about the thing that comes after the thing, it'll be almost silly even to talk about it, to talk about AI, because it'll be in everything, in different levels. So let's be clear, when I'm talking about AI, what I'm talking about is kind of industrial-grade AI. What I'm not talking about is general intelligence smarter than human AI. Because in the real world, as we're thinking about the future of AI, there is a wide swath of artificial intelligence and the stuff that is just there to do work. It's there to get things done. It's there to actually go and make us more productive, get more things done, make us more entertained, whatever. There's this wide swath. And then there's a small bit of it, which is sort of smarter than human, general intelligence. A lot of that conversation is actually tips over into philosophy. It tips over into the nature of humanity and the nature of who we are and what intelligence is and things like that. And I'm not a philosopher. So most of what we're talking about and most of what we're going to be talking about for the next 5 or 10 years is this actual kind of industrial AI that's doing work, that's software, that's trained by humans on data to actually get things done. And so as thinking like a futurist, as you go out to sort of think about, okay, well, what happens if we're not even talking about AI anymore? That it's not even this thing that's always in the headlines because it's always in the headlines back there, and people are talking about the next big thing. What happens if there's just, it's throughout our lives? So what does that mean, and how do we then value that? What is the future we want, and what is the future we want to avoid? What are the things that we want to get out of it, and what are the things we don't want to get out of it? This is one of the things that the conversations that we're not having when we talk about AI is that, what do we want? And what do we not want? What do we value? One of the things that we're going through right now is we are radically rethinking human labor. I can tell you as a professor, what we're doing right now is radically rethinking education. This is what makes everybody super uncomfortable right now. Because before we used to say in academia, and especially as we're training young minds, oh, well, we're teaching them critical thinking because we're making them write term papers and reports. No, it turns out they weren't critical thinking. They were just becoming term paper and report machines that were then writing these things out. And so when people get all freaked out about ChatGPT or BART or any of these LLMs and any of these generative AIs, it's because it's actually making us look at ourselves and saying, okay, wait, what are we doing here? I was joking with some folks today, that's one of the things about technology, and this has happened before, right? We've actually seen this happen before, whether it be with the internet or machines, or even like calculators, right? You don't look at a calculator like, I'm not good at maths at all. When I look at the calculator, which is really good at maths and is much better than I am, I do not think that the calculator is going to take over the world. I don't. You might. Don't. So it's not going to, the calculators didn't rise up and take over, but that would be really good. That would be really good. Like the March of the Calculators, that would be super cool, and it'd be like really ominous. But they'd be like super small. Anyway, so the calculators didn't take over the world. So the next step is to kind of go, all right, well, let's think about that. And again, what's the future we want and what's the future we want to avoid as we sort of go through and do that. And so as it's riven through that, we can start to make those decisions because we get to make those decisions, right? We get to think about kind of where things are going and what we want to get out of it, and we ask what's the future we want and what's the future we want to avoid. And we're not imbuing it with too much power, which is one of the things that we kind of trip into. Now, what I tell people again is that if a machine can take your job probably sucked. It's true. Like if a machine could do your job, it was turning you into if your job was turning you into a machine, right? And we had that actually. There used to be human beings that were called computers, people who computed. They don't have jobs anymore, by the way, because they were turned into basically calculators. And so as we think about that, to say, well, wow, wait a minute, we are radically revaluing in economic terms, like real honest-to-goodness money terms, we are economically reevaluating what we value. Now, don't get me wrong. If a computer or a machine can take your jobs, if a robot can take your job, yeah, your job sucked, but your wage didn't. And that's actually what we're talking about. We're not talking about, is the AI going to take your job? We're talking about very human things. And so as you start to think about the future of AI, and we sort of get into some of these more darker areas, which we will, the thing to remember, bring it up, boom. It's all about the humans. And this might seem painfully obvious, but then now, as you are becoming newly minted futurists, it's a really great way to orient your thinking. Because as we think about the Übermorgen, in context of AI, again, moving from this dark stuff to safety, how do we get there? Right? What's the thing that we can do? So I've given you a lot of information about what's there and the flaws and how we can think about it. We know that AI is going to be riven through everything that we're doing. What does it mean? And what should we do about it? My argument has always been, bam, humans. What does it mean for humans? Because AI is irrelevant. And only when it comes back to humans. That's really fun. If you can do anything in your life, to be able to do that is really cool. So what do I mean by that? I kind of lose my train of thought when that happens, just so you know. Like, you would too. Trust me, you really would. It's like Harry Potter stuff. It's really cool. So when you think about AI, it's more about the effect on humans. And so as we think about artificial intelligence, so here's one thing we should definitely talk about, right? We think about artificial intelligence. It has the ability to be brought into our business lives and do a lot of tasks that human beings were paid for before. And so people, again, say, oh my gosh, the AI is going to take your jobs. And I go back to you as futurists, as you have these conversations with people, to say to them, the AI is not taking your job. What is taking your job is a human. It's a human that is using the AI. And when we talk about this nebulous world of, oh, it's AI, and it's science fiction, and it's really scary, okay, fine. You may not know about machine learning and AI and all that stuff. But what you do know is humans. It's somebody's doing it. Find them. Like, actually have those conversations, because this is what worries me as we think about the future of where things are going with AI. And yes, it's going to make us very productive. It's going to allow us to do really amazing things. I mean, if all those dark images I showed you of like things on fire, all those were made with AI. I'm actually using AI in the work that I do as a futurist and the work that I do as a sci-fi author. It's an interesting tool to do a lot of work. But when we talk about all the dark stuff, don't just talk about the technology, because it's never about the technology, ever. It wasn't about the internet. It wasn't about phones. It wasn't about this. It was always humans. It was always about the people. One of the things that I railed against a couple years ago as we were starting to talk about AI, and it was really before it became really popular, I would have people come to me and say, BDJ, we need to make ethical AI. And I said, no, we don't. And then again, they looked at me like I was crazy, which you get used to after a while. And I was like, no, we don't. Because if the AI is ethical or not, it doesn't matter. And I was like, go with me. If the AI is ethical or not, it doesn't matter. How do you judge it is by when it comes back and touches other human beings. It's actually about us. It's not about the AI. It's not about the technology at all. It's actually about the human beings. And so what I tell them is that what you're talking about is making ethically compliant AI. It is ethically compliant to who? To us. To the, come on, somebody's got to say humans. Come on. There we go. Okay, let's try it again. It's ethically compliant to, boom. Yeah, there we go. This is great. So, and the thing is, I don't know if we have any ethics, people who do ethics work here, or people who work in corporate government or ethics, or people who do that. But the cool thing when you work with those folks is you can define it. Like, you can literally say, like, as an organization and as a culture, we find this actually acceptable. And we have been doing this for all of humanity. I like to tell my students, you can't make a hammer sufficient enough to build a house that is also not sufficient enough to bash somebody's head in. You can't. That's technology. So why are we all not walking around with hammers in our heads? Because as the humans, we have said, that's not cool. Right? It's not cool to hit somebody else in the head. We have laws, we have ethics, we have norms, we have culture. Culture is the thing that we're swimming in to kind of go, dude, don't do that. That's bad. We need a little bit more of that. Hey, dude, don't do that with your AI. Like, don't do that. Because for our culture, that is not acceptable. So this is what I push back to you as you think about the future of AI, how we move from AI to safety and AI to where we're not even talking about AI anymore, is we're having the right conversations at the right time. And now is the time to stop talking about AI and start talking about, yeah, right? So, and I get into that, and I don't mean it in a really soft way. I mean, I'm really specific. Like, what do we want as a city, a culture, an organization, my family? What do we want? Like, what are the things that we want? Because we have that ability to then go and imbue it and have that conversation with it. And say, okay, here's how we can go and actually make it compliant and can make that work. Because, you know, if AI goes off and does stuff on its own, that's fine. Here's another thing. As you talk about some of the darker stuff, so some of the more military things like that I do with that, the fact of the matter is, as we look out to the future, we will have more and more artificial intelligence, AI, robots, hyperfast computing that is in military aspects and in the world of defense and offense. We also know, as we have learned from history, is that, again, if people are going to have a technology, so even though it's not cool to hit somebody in the head with a hammer, people still get hit in the head with hammers. It's true. But we then, as a culture, to say, that's not good, stop that. So we then need to know that people are going to use AI for ill. And we are going to, as cultures, need to actually use artificial intelligence in those ways. It will have a level of autonomy to be able to go off. Now, I'm not advocating for autonomous killing machines or anything like that, but we're going to need it to be able to make decisions that are faster than we can process those decisions. But one of the most important things to remember, and this is one of the things in a lot of the work that I did with NATO, we did work on, it's just, you guys are really nice, and so like also, like my wife tells me it's kind of hard to bring me to a barbecue sometimes because they say, oh, hey, how's it going? Hey, how are you? I'm good, I'm good. So BDJ, what are you working on? Oh, yeah, I'm doing this great project for NATO where we're looking at emerging disruptive technologies and weapons of mass destruction. How about you? It's a real buzzkill. So we did work for NATO, actually looking at, and this is not classified, it's actually out there, you can just Google it, it comes up. That title is actually the title of the report. Not light reading. But we actually had to come to grips with that. I mean, believe me, there is nothing more seriously serious than nuclear war. Okay, we can agree on that, right? Yeah, okay. So that idea of saying, okay, so if here we are today, we're going to have AI, we're going to have a lot more AI, and we're thinking about nuclear war, which, by the way, we all agree is bad, what do we do? How do we stop it? What are the things that we can do? Well, we actually start to architect that system to say, hey, wait a minute, nuclear war is bad. We want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Turns out most people do. If they don't, that's a whole other conversation. Most people do. So what we need to do is build those systems with the ability to kind of make sure that that doesn't happen. And so how do you do that? Well, you can actually architect a system with something called a fire break. Get a little, we were talking about getting a little serious. So a fire break, as we all know, right, is when you're fighting wildfires, is you're not stopping it, you're actually just breaking it so you can slow down the wildfire. So you can slow it down so that you can go and take action. So you can actually build these systems, and it's not only with nuclear war, it's also with all these AI systems, whether they be in human resources, in design, in education. You build them so that as you're architecting them forward, and then you reach a point where things get really, really intense, you build a fire break in, because that's when we call on, right. It sounds super simple, but as you go through, again, as you leave here and start to talk to people about AI and about all this stuff, it works. It actually works. And that doesn't mean that this is a panacea and goes through and sort of creates everything, but it is so incredibly important to make sure that when we talk about technology, we talk about all these systems, that we're keeping human beings at the center. Because in most of the conversations that we have, again, it's all about the tech. It's all about this. And that's exciting. Again, I'm a tech nerd. I come from Silicon Valley. It is really cool stuff. But we always need to make sure that we keep human beings at the center. And you can interrogate yourself, and you can interrogate policymakers and decision makers and leadership, because if you're not keeping human beings at the center, nothing good comes of that. It's really a very clarifying way to think about all these advances as we move things forward, is to say, how are we affecting the humans? What humans are involved in this? What humans should be involved who are not involved in this? There's a really systematic way of thinking about these, and it's what I do in working with these governments and militaries and corporations, is to actually instrument that, is to make sure that we've always got the humans at the center, and we're understanding the human impact of what we are doing. And so you as futurists, as you're thinking about the future of AI, and this is where we are now, and here's all the stuff that can do, and a lot of it's really good, and some of it's really bad, and then we start thinking, okay, well, it's going to be riven throughout. What's the future we want, and what's the future we want to avoid? I then add, and what is the effect on humans? How are we affecting people in a positive way? Are there human beings that could be harmed? Are there things that could go wrong? And let's think that through. And that's where you as futurists now can start thinking about the bad stuff. Again, I am an optimist, but I'm an optimist who does work in, the weaponization of artificial intelligence and nuclear war and things like that. Like, it's the idea of saying we need to think about all those dark places. We need to think about the dark things so that we can then prevent them. So I'm not opposed to having those conversations. It goes back to that party metaphor that I used before. You can come in and go, oh my gosh, this stuff is really bad. Here's all the things that could go really, really wrong. But then take a moment and go, okay, well, what should we do about it? How do we stop it? How do we make sure that it has the right effect? And we're starting to do that. So there's a lot of hope there for me. For me, I am much more hopeful, and not just because I'm an optimist, I am much more hopeful today than I was 5 years ago about artificial intelligence and all the things that could go wrong. Because we are fundamentally having conversations now that we weren't having them. As I was on the floor today, kind of walking through and kind of listening to folks, there were people having very similar conversations, talking about how it affects human beings, talking about how you're using it with kids, talking about how you're understanding the impact of it, and how are we amplifying people's humanity? How are we making them more creative? How are we making them more productive? How are we making sure that we are taking the drudgery work, and being able to not have to do that, but then do other things? And it's really a difficult conversation as you really wind it out as futurists, because it's hard, because we're actually turning the mirror back on ourselves and actually thinking about, okay, so what does it mean about us? What does it mean about humans? And that's the hard work that comes out of this. So oftentimes, a lot of the ways that I turn this around as we think about the future of any technology, any business, that we always are bringing it back to that and having that conversation. So what I want to do as we're getting down to time is to say, okay, to review. Thinking about the future, you start here, you go to the flowers. Okay, it's not about the next big thing. We're going to talk a lot about the next big thing for the next few days here at South by Southwest. It's going to be awesome. But what you are now going to do is actually ask, what's the thing that comes after the thing, also known as the... It's like a rolling wave of Ubermorgen. It's really great. Yeah, you're going to think about the Ubermorgen. So great, what comes after that? And not only what comes after it, but what do I want to come after it? What's the positive and the negative? Like, where is it going to go? And actually knowing to give yourself the room to think about a lot of different futures. Don't force yourself to pick one future. That's terrible. Wouldn't you like 5? It's great. So think about all those futures. And then what's the bar? What is the effect on humans? What is the effect on people? How can we make sure that ultimately what we're trying to do is about people? Because that's actually a litmus test and a bar that actually you'll find very clarifying as we think about AI, which now we all know is just software that's built by humans, that's trained. So great. Now let's think about those things. Now with all that said, I want to challenge you as you walk out in about 5 to 10 minutes. So you have this, you know how to think like a futurist, you've got some clarifying ways of thinking about how we can actually make the future better. So one of the things that I have learned over the years about doing this, and again, seeing it happen, writing science fiction for adults, writing science fiction for kids, writing these books for kids, writing graphic novels and all that type of stuff, that I kind of put it to myself to say, okay, if we're going to get together and build a future, how do we make one that's better? Right? We don't predict the future, and it's not even that we're trying to find the most optimal future. How do we actually change the future? Like, what are the steps that we can take to go and fundamentally change the future? And what I learned is how you change the future is you change the story people tell themselves about the future that they will live in. This is extraordinarily powerful. Sounds very simple, but it's very powerful. Because if you can change the story that people tell themselves about the future that they will live in, you will make different decisions. Right? If you can see yourself in a different future, and that's the power of imagination, because nothing great was ever built by humans that wasn't imagined first. So if you have the ability to imagine yourself in a very different future and be able to tell yourself that story, you will start making different decisions. That's part of what I was doing here today, is giving you the raw materials to fundamentally reimagine your future with artificial intelligence, knowing that you have the ability to write that story. And the really great thing about stories is, number one, if you tell yourself that story, it's something that you can kind of keep telling yourself, so that when you hear somebody who comes and says everything's going to end on Tuesday and we're all going to die and the machines are going to come and take over, it's going to be a Terminator hellscape, tell yourself the better story. Because what's really cool is that human beings are story-believing machines. Stories drive us. And what becomes really powerful with your own story is when you share it. So going back to the idea of the Übermorgen and being able to talk with people and interrogate them about their Übermorgen and where they're going, even more powerful than that is to come up with what is the story of that future. How do we change that story, the future that you want to live in? And then to be able to go to somebody and say, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I want. I know we talked about this with AI and all these technologies. Here's the future that I want. And then you'll talk to that person, and hopefully they'll go and think about theirs, and then maybe you'll disagree. That's awesome. By the way, disagreement's really cool, because then you can talk about it and say, okay, well, how can we maybe change that, and what does that look like? And by the way, not all stories have to be the same, and that's okay. But being able to have those conversations, it starts to spread. And I've seen these stories spread, and we've seen it happen, actually, throughout humanity, as you see that story spread and being able to tell better stories. Stories that are centered around being positive, knowing that the negative things are coming, but about humans, it becomes really, really important, and those actually spread. Now again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about the dark parts of AI, and I'm not talking about any of that, but knowing that we need to be responsible with our stories, and responsible with how we talk to other people about our stories. And of course, I say this as a person who writes for young minds, who, by the way, who are going to be the next generation, who are actually going to be living in this future of AI. We have a responsibility to tell better stories to that generation so that they can then go and build those. As we're all running around talking about Terminator hellscapes, it actually matters to the next generation. And so being able to tell that, so being able to say, okay, how do we change the future? Is we change the story that people tell themselves about the future that they will live in, do that for yourself, and then be able to share it. And that's going to be my challenge to you as you leave the room today, is to do that. And here's the thing. I know you care. I know you care about the future. When I was invited to come and talk, flip over your badges. Right, who does the future belong to? You're here because you care about the future. Anybody here who doesn't care about the future? There we go. There's always one person who's just like, I could take it or I could leave it. Well, that's fine. That's cool. But that idea is that you do care. And you can be empowered to do that. So you're here because you care about the future. You have this incredible platform of this event, you have a bunch of like-minded people. They're all wearing badges that say the future belongs to the curious, right? You can spot them, right? That's why I love walking around Darling Harbor, because I actually just see them. Look, there they are, there they are. You actually can go and talk to people, right? There's all the amazing talks, there's all the amazing podcasts, all the amazing things going on. But this is a really, really rare moment where you're surrounded by a bunch of like-minded people who care about the future. And that's powerful. That's how the future actually changes, is when passionate people get together and talk about the future and talk about what they want and then start taking action. That's actually how the future gets changed. That's actually how it gets built. And to me, it's so rare because you're not given the platform, and South by Southwest Sydney is that platform. But one of the other things that why I was so excited to come and talk to everybody is the permission. I give you the permission to say, I can shape my future. This is the future I want. This is the future I want to avoid. Right? We talked about all these positive things and negative things with AI and all this stuff. This is what I think. This is really where I want things to go. And my challenge to you is, number one, give yourself that permission. Own the fact that you will build the future. You will build your future, the future of your family, your community, your business, everything about it. You have that power inside of you. You have that agency. So you have the ability to do that. You now have the permission. Give yourself the permission. And I know it sounds a little silly, but we had this time together, so believe me, I got no problem being silly. Like that idea of the Ubermorgen and all those different sorts of things, to give yourself the permission to go and the time to say, what do I want? What do I want to avoid? Where are things going? What's the story I want to tell myself? Because once you've done that, you've given yourself that permission, I want you to share it. It could just be with your family, it could just be with your friends, or it could be with perfect strangers. And by the way, this has happened before sometimes. So you have perfect strangers talking about, okay, what's your Ubermorgen? To actually go and have that conversation, because it's those conversations are how things spread and how we actually get together and make the future better. And I think that's the goal for all of us. I would argue that's why you're here. Certainly you want to learn about AI and learn about futurist thinking, but now you understand it. How can we get together and build something that's better and actually have the confidence and the permission and the intellect, right, with the rigor of being able to do it correctly to actually make that change. So that's going to be my challenge to you, is to say, hey, look, you now have all these tools. You have the platform. You're all in it right now. It's a very interesting moment in time to then have the permission and give yourself the permission and the time to do it. Because I think you care about the future. And there's no better time to start thinking like a futurist and start taking action than today, because if we don't, and we don't keep the humans at the center, we're going to be in trouble. I always tell people you need to be an active participant in your future. You can't let somebody else build your future for you. Because if you let somebody else build your future for you, that doesn't turn out well. So now you have the ability to go and do it. And so I challenge you to step out, to go and do that, and use your time here, and use these super passionate, amazing people who are all around you, who are very similar, to actually go and think about that. And if we can do that, we actually can build a better future. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. We're going to go, and down at the bookstore, we're going to be doing a signing afterwards. So if anybody wants to come and hang out and talk, I'll be down there. I'm going to be around all week. So I'm around I'm very easy to spot. So you can be very easy to spot. And to have those conversations. So we can get together. Again, this is just the beginning. We can continue talking about AI. We'll be down at the bookstore right after this, after I can kind of get out of here and go through and do it. But with that, I want to say thank you so much for coming out in the afternoon on the second day. It's very important to me, and I think there's so much work that we can actually do together. So thank you very much.